In places revered as sacred, women were bound by rules no one would dare speak of. The air was always heavy with incense, thick and cloying, settling into the lungs with each breath. Shadows clung to the stone walls like living things, dark and watchful, their presence a constant reminder of the unseen eyes that monitored every movement. Bells tolled softly, carrying a weight beyond melody, echoing through corridors that knew neither laughter nor complaint. Here, silence was more than absence. It was law, enforced with a rigor that left no room for deviation. And within that silence, entire lives were confined, measured not by choice but by obedience, shaped by expectations that pressed down like the weight of the stones themselves. At first glance, the temple appeared ordinary. Pilgrims came and went with bowed heads, unaware of the undercurrents beneath the rituals they observed. The chants were steady, ritualistic, almost reassuring in their predictability. Women moved through these halls as if through water, deliberate, absorbed in devotion, their movements a choreographed performance of piety. Their tasks were presented as noble, spiritual duties, promising honor and salvation. Candles were lit with trembling hands, flames dancing in the drafts that whispered through the corridors. Altars were swept with precision, not a grain of dust permitted to remain. Offerings were arranged in geometric order, each placement a testament to discipline. Every movement maintained harmony, or so it appeared to those who watched from outside. To the outside world, they were symbols of piety and grace, embodiments of the sacred feminine, vessels of divine devotion. And yet none could perceive the weight they carried, the invisible burdens that bent their backs and bowed their heads. Ordinariness concealed something more, something darker, something that thrived in the spaces between ritual and reality. Some duties were stricter than anyone could imagine, bound by constraints that went unspoken yet were universally understood. The rules were whispered among women themselves, carried in glances and gestures, never spoken aloud outside the walls that contained them. Obedience was absolute, a requirement that permitted no exception. Failure was unthinkable, carrying consequences that lingered in memory long after the transgression itself had been forgotten. And those who questioned, even silently, even in the privacy of their own thoughts, faced consequences that history refuses to name. Isolation was the first cost, the initial price extracted for deviation. Women slept in chambers apart from the rest of the temple, separated not just physically but spiritually, cut off from the communal warmth that might have sustained them. Letters were forbidden, contact with the outside world severed as completely as if they had died. Their voices belonged only to themselves. Conversation beyond the walls was forbidden, each word a potential betrayal. Friendships existed, but only within strict bounds, carefully monitored lest any whisper reach the unseen authorities who governed every aspect of their existence. Some learned to measure life not by sunlight or seasons, but by shadow and echo. Days were no longer divided into hours, they were counted in rituals repeated until meaning blurred, in the number of times bodies bent to stone floors, in cycles of prayer that replaced clocks entirely. Bare feet memorized the chill of worn tiles, ears learned the muted clatter of bowls, the controlled ring of bells, the soft hiss of incense ash settling like gray snow on surfaces already thick with residue. Nothing was neutral. Every sound carried instruction, every pause demanded attention. The architecture itself enforced obedience. Narrow corridors allowed no wandering. Locked doors divided the sacred from the forbidden. Staircases appeared without explanation, leading to rooms whose purposes were never revealed. Space was carefully managed, not to guide, but to confine. Movement existed only within permission. Secrets shaped daily existence. Knowledge was withheld deliberately, transformed into a tool of control. Rituals were performed without explanation, ceremonies were enacted without meaning disclosed. Expectations were never spoken clearly, only implied through gesture and silence. To ask was to challenge authority, to understand was dangerous, to admit understanding was unthinkable.
Even the most devoted could not see where obedience ended and transgression began. Curiosity itself became a risk.
Outsiders saw serenity. Pilgrims witnessed calm faces and disciplined devotion, never suspecting the invisible gulf separating those who lived within the system from those who briefly passed through it. Behind closed doors, obedience pressed against every thought. Minds learned to edit themselves before ideas could fully form. Desires were unnamed, longings suppressed until they hardened into silence. The toll accumulated slowly, invisibly, year after year. Fear required no chains. Silence enforced itself. Authority needed no physical presence to be effective. Endurance became the highest virtue. Survival depended on functioning without resistance. Bodies moved through prescribed motions with precision, hands completing tasks flawlessly, while thoughts were constantly measured and restrained. Attention was dangerous. Visibility was risk. The only safety lay in becoming unnoticed, present but erased. Fragments survived. Hidden letters, marginal notes, testimonies written cautiously, stripped of excess emotion. One unnamed survivor wrote, "We survived not by strength, but by learning to disappear while present." Another, known only as Sister Marguerite, recorded, "Even the faithful could not see us, though we stood among them daily." These accounts avoided spectacle. Horror was not dramatic, it was procedural, embedded quietly in routine. History turned away. Records celebrated ceremonies, expansions, relics acquired, wings constructed. They did not record the cost. The women who maintained the sanctity of the institution vanished from official memory, erased so completely they appeared never to have existed. Reverence endured, its casualties did not. Silence became the artifact. Absence itself testified to deliberate forgetting. Each blank space in the records spoke of lives excluded by design. The moral consequence extended beyond the walls. A society capable of honoring ritual while ignoring its victims had perfected the art of selective devotion. Yet endurance lingered. It remained in echoes, in empty corridors, in the faint memory carried by those who survived. Sounds, the rustle of fabric, the clink of bowls, the extinguishing of candles, held layers of meaning invisible to casual observers, but unmistakable to those who knew. The temple enforced hierarchy with precision. Isolation chambers, endless corridors, locked rooms where time stalled. Women learned the language of walls. A loose stone warned of approaching authority. A tile pattern revealed which paths were forbidden. Silence monitored everything. Sleep offered no refuge. Bells divided time. Even dreams were disciplined. Shame followed any mental failure. Meals, too, were rituals of surveillance. Every gesture scrutinized. Pleasure forbidden. The body itself became regulated territory. Nothing escaped control. And within that total order, survival depended on learning how to exist without being seen.
Over time, the women developed methods of survival that allowed them to preserve a small, protected core of self within the overwhelming pressure of institutional control. Some whispered prayers inwardly, creating private liturgies no authority could hear, direct conversations with the divine that bypassed sanctioned mediation. Others practiced fleeting gestures of defiance, a brief hesitation before obedience, a look that suggested memory beyond the walls, a momentary assertion of will. Each act had to disappear instantly, erased before it could be noticed. Surveillance was constant yet unseen, so thorough that its mechanisms remained invisible even to those it governed. The smallest action could be remembered and transformed into consequence, never formally recorded but deeply felt. Even the elders became instruments of control, their role demanding enforcement of the very systems that confined everyone. Their approval functioned as both protection and restraint. A nod might grant temporary relief. A frown could dismantle the fragile sense of self women struggled to maintain. Authority operated through implication rather than decreed. Women learned to interpret unspoken signals with scholarly precision, a tilt of the head signaling favor or warning, the cadence of a chant revealing mood, the order of incense replacement reflecting hierarchy. Every interaction became a negotiation with silence and power, where minor missteps could trigger disproportionate consequences. Some histories survived only through memory, stories whispered at night, passed in fragments so delicate that each retelling risked their disappearance. These stories shaped understanding more profoundly than formal instruction ever could. They carried names and choices, examples of endurance when rebellion was impossible. Sister Catherine became legendary for retaining inner dignity through decades of degradation. The woman with the scarred hands, remembered without a formal name, was known for her refusal to weep despite visible punishment. These identities, preserved only through oral memory, became proof that survival itself could be resistance. Punishments were rarely documented. Often psychological, they included intensified isolation, exclusion from communal rituals, or restricted access to sacred spaces. The most effective measures left no physical trace, only erosion of certainty, the slow narrowing of thought and hope. Fear worked best when internalized, when obedience became self-enforced. Yet acts of quiet courage endured. A woman might secretly memorize a prayer, refusing to let devotion become hollow repetition. Another might offer comfort without words, sustaining a sister through gesture alone. Resistance lived in silence, remembrance, and the refusal to vanish completely. These acts were never recorded, yet they sustained life within impossible boundaries. Historical erasure was deliberate. Chronicles celebrated buildings, festivals, patronage, and ritual splendor while excluding suffering. Names were omitted, endurance ignored. Absence itself became evidence. Where ink was withheld, silence testified. The architecture mirrored this control. Walls contained, corridors constrained, doors closed with finality. The temple was both sanctuary and prison, devotion and domination fused into stone. Women moved through these spaces as shadows, their presence acknowledged only through absence. Survivors later described a lasting division between life within the walls and life beyond them. Outside, truth could not always be spoken. Silence remained, not just as habit, but as protection from disbelief, dismissal, and the impossibility of making others understand.
The emotional toll accumulated slowly over years until the weight became nearly unbearable. Women developed ways to preserve their sanity, internal prayers that could not be monitored, secret observations of the outside world, and quiet rituals in hidden spaces that maintained a small sphere of autonomy. Even fleeting freedoms, holding a flower, feeling sunlight on skin, listening to birdsong, were treasured silently, hoarded like gems against the rigid confinement of their lives. These small acts became lifelines, continuity in a world governed by near-total surveillance. Some legacies persisted despite efforts at erasure. Sister Teresa of the Northern Chamber recalled, "We lived in shadows, yet we remembered light." Another, known in fragments as Marie, wrote, "Though no one saw us, we bore witness to the sacred." These fragments reveal the human capacity to preserve identity and faith, even under systematic suppression. The temple demanded conformity and enforced it ruthlessly, yet individuality persisted stubbornly in quiet corners. Patterns of control were deliberate. Obedience was maintained not by force, which could provoke resistance, but through ritual, hierarchy, and selective recognition that made compliance appear natural. Mistakes were memorized, not recorded, inscribed on minds and bodies rather than in any official ledger. Every repetition of duty reinforced the invisible architecture of subjugation, embedding habits that could outlast the temple itself. Even affection was constrained. Warmth was permitted only within strict boundaries, preventing relationships that might compete with institutional loyalty. Empathy was expressed through subtle gestures, small movements that sustained solidarity without violating rules. Love, friendship, and support existed in compressed, almost invisible forms, refined under pressure. Care and healing followed the same rigid structure. Illness or injury was managed through ritualized procedures, sometimes prioritizing form over recovery. Compassion became another performance, judged by doctrine rather than human need, integrated into the system of control instead of resisting it. Survivors' reflections reveal the paradox of complicity. Women enforced rules they had not created, acting as both victims and instruments of the system. Endurance required participation. Survival demanded complicity. Yet within these constraints, subtle defiance and private preservation of memory persisted, invisible yet vital acts of resistance. Over time, a broader lesson emerges. Reverence can conceal suffering. Sanctity often masks exploitation. Institutions preserve their reputation by controlling memory, erasing human cost. Faith and obedience exact invisible tolls, burdens barely imaginable to outsiders. History records monuments, festivals, and sacred spaces, but omits the countless small sacrifices that sustained them. Absence becomes testimony, revealing what is deliberately hidden. Even centuries later, empty chambers retain the weight of those lives. Footsteps echo against stone as if carrying memories of disciplined, constrained, and resilient women. Shadows linger, recalling those who passed through, always present yet unacknowledged. The air itself seems heavy with devotion, fear, and endurance. Witnessing such endurance without spectacle reveals that profound suffering often leaves the fewest visible traces. Reverence exacts a quiet toll, obedience conceals pain, and courage persists silently. Their presence survives in absence, recorded not in words, but in spaces, silences, and the subtle architecture of memory. To stand within these spaces is to confront a profound paradox. Devotion preserved the sacred and traditions, yet demanded the surrender of self, erasing individuality in service to something larger. The stone walls, cold and unyielding, absorbed every thought, heartbeat, and hesitation, drawing human experience into themselves. Silence was both shield and cage, protection from exposure and barrier to expression. Endurance required invisibility, the careful disappearance of desire, complaint, and self, transforming women into obedient instruments. Yet this very invisibility became a vessel of memory, preserving truths when all formal records were closed. Whispers, gestures, and measured movements became testimony, written on bodies and minds rather than on paper. The walls themselves became repositories of human experience, witnesses to suffering hidden beneath the veneer of devotion, silent observers of exploitation disguised as spiritual discipline. Every ritual carried hidden cost, each repetition reinforcing the patterns that bound women to their roles. No chronicler could capture the tremor of a hand reaching for incense under fear, the constant calculations of the mind measuring every glance and step. The walls remembered the invisible ledger of endurance, the accumulation of quiet suffering that defined these lives. Women bore history in their hands, feet, and minds, Every gesture and ritual was an act of survival, a declaration that they persisted despite erasure. Mastery of invisibility became essential. To vanish without notice, bend attention without breaking devotion, and preserve a small, precious core of self within a system designed to consume it entirely. Every movement was a study in careful endurance, a step placed lightly on the cold stone to avoid drawing attention, a head bowed at the precise angle that demonstrated proper humility without suggesting excessive fear, a whisper of chant that carried no error, no hesitation, nothing that might mark the performer as different or deficient. Freedom was internalized and surrendered, a paradoxical art of self-erasure that allowed them to persist under invisible authority, to continue existing in a system designed to deny their individuality. In the quiet moments, when bells tolled and incense curled through the corridors like smoke tracing memory, the weight of these lives became almost tangible, present in the atmosphere itself. One could sense it in the faint echo of footsteps that seemed to carry more than physical sound, in the subtle rustle of robes that whispered of lives constrained by fabric and custom, in the soft tap of hands against stone as offerings were placed with ritualistic precision. The temple was simultaneously sanctuary and instrument, offering protection while enforcing control, protector and oppressor in the same breath. The duality was invisible to those who had never entered these chambers, who saw only the external beauty and missed the internal cost, yet undeniable to those who had survived within them, who understood through lived experience the complexity of their situation. Every corner, every alcove, every hidden staircase carried traces of endurance, traces that could be felt if only one paused long enough to sense them, to allow the accumulated weight of past suffering to make itself known. Even decades later, the pattern persists in memory for those few survivors who remain and those to whom they've passed their stories. Faith, obedience, and endurance coexist with suffering, bound together in a complex relationship that cannot be easily untangled, recorded invisibly in gestures, expressions, and the rhythm of daily life that encodes meaning beyond what words can capture. Silence carries meaning in ways that speech never could. Absence carries proof more powerful than any documented evidence. Those who endured became living monuments, their invisibility itself an emblem of perseverance, their very existence a testament to human capacity for survival under impossible conditions. Every subtle adjustment in posture, every deferred glance, every carefully measured movement was a record of survival, documentation written on the body rather than on paper. Observing the temple today, one could still trace these patterns if attuned to the echoes, if willing to listen to the invisible rhythms left behind by countless women whose devotion was inseparable from their sacrifice. Those who endured were never merely subjects of ritual, passive recipients of tradition. They were witnesses, active observers of the systems that constrained them, record keepers in the only form available. Subtle gestures, internalized stories, quiet observation that missed nothing even when it could record nothing. Each act of compliance was also an act of endurance. Each measured repetition preserved memory in the only way possible under the circumstances. They survived as proof that systems of devotion can demand unimaginable costs, yet sustain life in forms unseen, that the human spirit can persist even under conditions designed to crush it. Their stories, though erased from official history, persisted in the cadence of work, in the rhythm of prayer, and in the silent architecture of habit, encoded in practices and patterns that could not be entirely eliminated. They bore witness through the very endurance that society attempted to render invisible, transforming their survival itself into testimony. The temple doors closed behind them daily, shutting out the world and shutting them in, and the shadows stretched across corridors like long fingers, carrying memory with them, preserving what official history refused to acknowledge. Incense curled upward in thin, deliberate streams, carrying with it the weight of devotion and the residue of sacrifice, smoke that seemed to bear the accumulated prayers and sorrows of generations. Bells tolled in measured intervals, marking not only the passage of time, but the rhythm of obedience, each ring a reminder of duties and deadlines. Steps echoed, repeating patterns that had been rehearsed for decades, centuries even, yet remained always new to the untrained observer who had not learned to read the subtle variations that carried meaning. Names were forgotten, deliberately excluded from official records, actions unrecorded in any ledger, yet through all absence, presence persisted, refusing to be entirely erased. The memory of these lives, though silent, pressed against the stone itself, as palpable as a whispered prayer carried on the wind, as real as the incense smoke that filled the corridors. Reverence, when enforced through systems of control, exacted burden beyond what those who merely observed could comprehend. Obedience, when absolute and backed by institutional power, demanded price that continued to accumulate across lifetimes. Yet courage persisted quietly, in forms so subtle they were almost invisible, defying erasure through sheer, stubborn existence. Women endured, finding subtle ways to assert selfhood within the impossible architecture of expectation, carving out tiny spaces of autonomy in a system designed to permit none. A glance exchanged with a sister, conveying understanding and solidarity, a whispered prayer in the night that connected to something beyond institutional mediation, a careful tracing of ritual gestures to preserve memory of their true meaning. All these became acts of silent resistance, small rebellions that accumulated over time. Through the persistence of these quiet acts, truth survived against all odds. Not in records that could be destroyed, not in stone that could be recarved, not in chronicles that could be edited, but in the lived experience of those who had walked these corridors and borne their weight, in memories that could not be entirely suppressed. Within the stone, the silence, the ritual, one could discern a hidden ledger of human experience if willing to look carefully enough. Each act of endurance, each suppressed fear, each internalized sorrow left its mark, not visible to the casual observer who saw only surfaces, but embedded in the texture of the walls, absorbed into the very fabric of the building, present in the cadence of movement, the almost imperceptible rhythm of daily life that encoded centuries of experience. These women were not passive victims accepting their fate without resistance. They were active participants in survival, writing their own story through the careful management of presence and absence, through the mastery of ritualized endurance that allowed them to persist, through the preservation of memory where no record dared to exist. And still, centuries later, the echoes of those lives persist for those willing to hear them. Footsteps along the stone corridors, a bell tolling in the distance, the faint smell of incense lingering in enclosed spaces. They carry more than atmosphere. They carry history, accumulated experience transformed into sensory memory, a witness to devotion intertwined with suffering. Memory, though silent and often suppressed, survives in forms that cannot be entirely eliminated. Endurance, though invisible to those who choose not to see, remains embedded in the very structure of these spaces. The temple itself becomes a text, its architecture an archive of human resilience, encoding in physical form what could not be safely written. One can read its walls, not in words that might be censored or destroyed, but in the subtle traces of lived experience. The worn stones that show where feet most frequently trod, the careful patterns of movement that became habitual, the restrained gestures that communicated what speech could not, the echoes of ritual performed without error across generations. To enter these spaces is to confront endurance as a tangible force, something that can be felt in the atmosphere itself. One feels it in the press of silence that seems heavier than mere absence of sound, in the measured sequence of ceremonial acts that continue even when their performers have changed, in the invisible weight that seems to settle upon the chest when standing in certain rooms. The paradox endures across centuries, unresolved and perhaps unresolvable. Devotion preserves sanctity, maintains traditions that connect present to past, yet requires self-erasure as the price of participation. Faith is both preservation and surrender, both connection to the divine and separation from the self. Obedience is both protection from chaos and confinement within rigid structures. And in this tension, in this careful balance between competing demands, memory persists despite all efforts to erase it. The women who survived were not merely performers of ritual, actors following a script written by others. They were historians of the invisible, documenting through their very existence what official history refused to record. Archivists of endurance who preserved truth in the only forms available to them, and guardians of truth in a system that sought to obliterate both the truth itself and those who witnessed it. In sacred walls that both sheltered and imprisoned, reverence often concealed the deepest suffering, the weight of sacrifice hidden beneath performances of willing devotion. Every repetition of ritual, performed with precision born of necessity, every careful movement calibrated to avoid punishment, every whispered prayer that maintained connection to meaning beyond mere mechanical compliance, all became both duty and resistance, obligation and rebellion existing in the same gesture. And those who bore it endured, unseen by those who chose not to look, unheard by those who preferred silence, unrecorded in ledgers that excluded what did not serve institutional narratives, yet never erased, never entirely eliminated despite all efforts. Their proof remains, subtle yet undeniable to those willing to perceive it, embedded in the silence that speaks louder than words, etched into the architecture that preserves what documents could not, lingering in the rhythm of memory itself that cannot be entirely suppressed. They were not prisoners of faith, though they were certainly confined by it. They were proof of human capacity for endurance, proof that truth persists even when systematically suppressed, proof that memory survives attempts at erasure. The echoes fade as the years pass and witnesses die, but the truth remains, embedded in stone and silence, waiting for those willing to listen. Sister Catherine, Sister Marguerite, Sister Teresa of the Northern Chamber, Marie, the woman with the scarred hands, these names and fragments of identity, preserved against all odds in whispered stories and hidden margins, stand as testament to countless others whose names are lost entirely. They walked these corridors, bore these burdens, maintained these silences, and through their endurance they witnessed and preserved truths that official history attempted to erase. Their legacy persists not in monuments or chronicles, but in the very stones that contained them, in the rhythms that organized their days, in the memories that refused to die. The temple stands as archive and tomb, monument and warning, sacred space and site of suffering. Its beauty conceals cost, its rituals encode pain, its silence preserves what words were forbidden to speak. And in this, it becomes a testament to all sacred institutions that demand sacrifice while denying the sacrifice was ever made, to all systems that extract obedience while erasing evidence of what that obedience cost. The women who endured within these walls were architects of survival, building from silence and shadow a structure of memory that outlasted the institution's attempts to destroy it.